We need to make certain we harness that energy and that we focus it with laser certainty to get things done as relates to issues concerning women's rights, health care, school issues, criminal justice reform, race issues. We can do this together. And that's why the experience is necessary in order to do that. And I say to each and every one of you, experience matters. Thank you.
Earlier today, we conducted a coin toss to determine the order for answering questions. State Senator West, will answer our first question first, and our first question of the night. While Democrats remain hopeful about their chances to flip 4 seats and gain control of the U.S. Senate in November, the latest projections show it is more likely Republicans will maintain the majority. So what is one piece of Republican-led legislation you support or see an opportunity to collaborate on? Senator West, we'll begin with you.
Well, the fact is that I see an opportunity to collaborate on all legislation as long as different viewpoints are respected. And from that vantage point, I hope that we're able to do that. We've got to get health care done. That's the #1 issue, and frankly, it's the most contentious issue. And so the question becomes is whether or not we're going to have persons on both sides that recognize that given everything that's going on with the COVID-19 and the number of people that are unemployed, that we've got to make certain that we have a health care system that's responsive to the needs of the people in this particular country. I'm hoping that we'll be able to work together on that issue.
All right, Mrs. Hagar, one piece of Republican-led legislation you support or see an opportunity to collaborate on?
Well, I definitely think that we're going to have the majority in the Senate, and I think Mitch McConnell knows it, too, as he goes around asking older federal court judges to retire so he can rush to replace them before he loses power. But I definitely think that the one key piece of legislation that I think that there is good, strong bipartisan support for is pharmaceutical pricing. We have to tackle our healthcare system. People don't have access to it either through financial access to coverage, but also here in Texas, we have a problem with people in rural areas having physical access. I worked in healthcare for 5 years, and I worked to try to solve that problem. But I do think that there's strong bipartisan support for reforming pharmaceutical pricing.
As the number of COVID-19 cases here in Texas and across the country continues to increase, what is one strategy you would like to put into place to keep people employed and Texas's economy thriving? Mrs. Hagar, we'll start with you this time.
So I said in April, when Governor Abbott was clearly not going to enforce his stay-at-home order, and when I didn't hear anything about testing and contact tracing, and when it was clear that he was also going to let it expire without looking at data and saying, we'll let it expire if we have these milestones in place, I'm seeing a real lack of crisis management. Maybe that's because I spent 12 years in the military and I'm used to watching how true leaders lead through a crisis. So I would like to see us listen to nurses and frontline workers and essential workers. Spending 5 years in healthcare, I learned that you listen to nurses. We're not getting them the safety gear, the PPE, the safety measures that they need to be able to do their jobs. So I believe that the health and the economic go hand in hand, because if we can't get the public health part of this under control, the economic piece won't recover.
Okay. Senator West.
We should never, ever put profit above public health. We know what the issues are. We know what other countries have done in order to, quote unquote, flatten the curve. And we have CDC recommendations that the President of the United States won't follow. And we've heard nothing from John Cornyn on following those recommendations. You look at the European Union in terms of the results over there. We need to look at some of the best practices there in order to make certain we flatten the curve. And yes, I don't have a problem with opening up the economy and doing it on an incremental basis, but that's if we follow the necessary guidelines that have been put in place by our experts, our medical experts. And so I'm hoping that we'll see that in Texas and we'll see that around the country, and that this president whose administration has basically said these are the recommendations that we're making. The president doesn't even follow his own administration's recommendation. Obviously, that's not something new for us. We know what type of president he is, and we know that John Cornyn is going to follow him off of the cliff.
Okay. And I'll remind both candidates, if there is something you would like to say after the other candidate speaks, you can just go ahead. Our next question. The Washington Post is reporting Russian bounties offered to Taliban-linked militants to kill U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan did result in the death of, quote, several members of our military. The president tweeted he was not briefed about the situation, referred to the killings as, quote, so-called attacks reported by fake news, and insists there have not been many attacks on U.S. soldiers. Now, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are demanding answers, revealing a true disconnect between the intelligence community, the White House, and Congress that ultimately puts our soldiers at risk. If elected, how would you address this? Senator West, we'll start with you.
Well, it's real clear that the president, how do I say it, has forgotten that he was briefed on this particular issue. Right. And from that vantage point, we know exactly what the relationship is between Putin and this president. When we get Joe Biden in office, we will begin to make certain that we bring those relationships between our two countries back to normal. As opposed to being the puppet of Putin, we'll have a president that'll stand up to Putin. And I'm glad to see that Democrats and Republicans are demanding answers. But the question is whether we get those answers before Donald Trump leaves office. We've got to do everything in our power to get those answers. But by the same token, we've got to elect Joe Biden president of the United States.
And so just to follow up there, I'm asking how would you propose that we address kind of the disconnect between the intelligence community, Congress, and the White House, and your solution is to simply elect a new president?
Well, but my solution is to elect a new president and make certain that that president has the, I guess you could say, the gravitas between the Congress and also the national agencies. The fact is that we've seen our national security agencies go against this particular president, which we've never seen before. And so by electing a president that respects the rights, respect the opinions of our national security experts, and also works with Congress, we'll make certain that we put Putin in check and keep him in a position of arm's length as opposed to hugging him and coddling him.
Okay. Mrs. Hagar, same question for you. What do you propose, or how do you propose we address the disconnect between the intelligence community, the White House, and Congress?
Ashley, it's so critical that we elect people who understand these really difficult and complex issues. I believe that there are a lot of things that get American soldiers killed, whether it's Russians paying bounties or the depletion, decimation of our State Department, setting a reputation for ourselves that our allies and our enemies can't take us at our word for things. I don't know whether or not this president was briefed. I think if he wasn't briefed, that's a real problem. But I don't know that it's necessarily about the briefings, because sometimes, we've already heard that he's not reading his briefing book, so maybe it was in a book, a red book that was flagged as important, and he would rather watch Fox News. All I know is we need to make sure that we have accountability and transparency. I believe that we need to, understand that we have things that happen that we don't brief the public on because they're classified. But what we don't need to do is have an administration that, while this is happening from our enemy, and let's be very clear that Putin is our enemy, all right? He has threatened the security of our elections. He's clearly threatening our forces' security abroad. That when we have that relationship, we should not be pushing for them to become the G8 from the G7, or increase their influence at the UN, or withdraw America's influence at the World Health Organization or the UN or NATO or other places. I see a lot of disturbing things happening. And yes, as a combat veteran who medevaced soldiers off the battlefield, I find it personally offensive to hear that nothing was done when Russia was paying bounties for American soldiers' lives. But it's also not surprising to me. And we need to stop being surprised by the actions of world leaders. We need to put people in a position to be able to sit on committees that know what questions to ask. I've had a top secret security clearance.
That is your time. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator West.
Let me respond to that. The fact is that we have never had a president that didn't take into consideration what the national security experts have said. We've seen this president do what? Fire people just because they fire and bully people just because they won't do what he says. That's why our country is in the situation that it's in now. And we've got to make certain that we have a president that will listen to the experts and then make a decision. We have to have a Congress that will work with the president, even though there may be Democrats and Republicans, that puts the people of this country first in terms of the security of this country and make certain that we keep Putin in his place.
Okay. We're going to shake things up just a little bit right now. We're going to have a few rapid fire questions. So candidates, you must answer these questions with one word. First, what do you believe is the greatest threat to America's national security? Mrs. Hagar.
Climate change.
Senator West.
Reputation with other countries. Oh, one question. Reputation.
Okay, got it. Yes or no?
One word, reputation.
Yes or no? Should there be term limits for U.S. senators? Senator West.
Yes.
No.
Oh, sorry. I'm eager about that one.
So Senator West
Yes.
said no. Mrs. Hagar, a firm yes. All right, next question. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, will you send your children or recommend that your grandchildren go back to the classroom this fall? Mrs. Hagar.
No, and I hope we can address this again later because we need to talk about that, but no.
Senator West.
No.
Yes or no? Should mail-in voting be expanded and offered to all eligible voters regardless of their circumstances? Senator West.
Yes.
Mrs. Hagar.
Yes.
And our last rapid fire question, in one word, what is one quality you admire about your opponent? Mrs. Hagar.
John Cornyn doesn't
No.
have any qualities I admire. I'm sorry, Ashley.
Senator West. I'm talking about Senator West. Right now, he's your opponent. You got to beat him in the next.
Commitment.
Senator West.
I see him as my partner, but yeah, commitment.
Military.
All right. It is now time for our viewer question. So earlier in the debate, we asked our viewers to vote on a topic that they wanted to hear a question about: healthcare, climate change, immigration, marijuana, or race relations. 44% say they want a question about healthcare. I'll remind the candidates that each of you have 1 minute to respond. You both talk about the importance of expanding access to healthcare. What's the best pathway to do that? Senator West, we'll begin with you.
I think that, first of all, overall, we need to make certain that healthcare becomes a fundamental issue to all Americans. When we begin to look at what's already on the table, we need to make certain that we take a look at the Affordable Health Care Act, fix the problems associated with that, make certain that we have the public option. And those persons that have a plan already, we need to make certain that they're still able to do that. It needs to be a priority for all legislators to get this done. You notice I said earlier that in terms of being able to work with Republicans on something, I want to be able to work with them on fixing the healthcare system, reducing the price of drugs. When we look at the price of drugs, think about this. Brand drugs, according to AARP, cost an average of $6,000 a year. That is insane. The fact is that we have the ability as a country to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, and we need to make certain that we negotiate with them in order to bring down the cost of Medicaid. The prescription drugs, and by doing that, we end up helping out in terms of the issues concerning health care within this country.
Mrs. Hagar, the best pathway to expand access to health care?
So to understand the best pathway, we also have to understand the current situation. Current situation before COVID, before the pandemic, and before record unemployment, we had nearly 1 out of every 5 Texans without health care coverage. We can't let John Cornyn take us back to a time when we can be discriminated against for pre-existing conditions and sold junk plans. He's been the Affordable Care Act's repeal's top salesman since it was, implemented, but I haven't heard a proposal to replace it. My proposal is that we absolutely protect pre-existing conditions and we move forward with a public option. I was on TRICARE when I was in the military, when I was in the National Guard, and that's like military Medicare. That was the superior product, and I believe we should have access to that product because the employer-provided model is a barrier to small business creation. It keeps people from quitting their jobs, and it also causes small businesses to not be able to keep the doors open because they're trying to, take care of their employees. We need a public option, but we should also be fighting for people's ability to determine what that access to quality, affordable health care means for them and their family.
All right. Tonight, we want to do something a little different. We're going to allow the candidates to ask each other one question. The candidate will have 1 minute to respond, and there will be no rebuttal. First, Mrs. Hagar will get to ask a question of Senator West. Go ahead.
Hi, Royce. How are you doing? I am most interested in what can unify us, because the most important thing and the barrier to being able to actually get the reforms that we need is John Cornyn. So what I want to know, and what I want you to have an opportunity to tell voters, is what things do you think you and I have in common that would make both of us a better choice for the U.S. Senate than John Cornyn in November?
Well, what I would say is this, that both of us are now Democrats. The fact is that we've got to make certain that we work with the party infrastructure, that we put together a plan for all Texans, whether they are Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. We get that done, then we're going to be successful. People want individuals in office that will govern and not govern based on the color of your jersey.
Okay, and now, Senator West, your question to Mrs. Hagar.
Now, I've got to ask you this question because too many people keep asking me this question. In 2011, there was a record of you contributing to John Cornyn just at the time when there was a debate concerning the Deficit Reduction Act, and the Tea Party was giving President Obama hell. And so I want to know, why did you contribute to John Cornyn, and is it true that you voted in a Republican primary in 2016 where the Republican presidential candidates were talking about doing away with the Affordable Health Care Act and also women's rights issues?
Well, Royce, I got to tell you, I'm disappointed, because I think that this is why people tune out from politics and why they are really tired, why we have low voter turnout. You know that that's not true, and you're intentionally misleading voters. And Texans have a very sensitive BS meter. They know what you're doing. All right, so this is my time, Royce, okay? I donated $25 to John Cornyn because I couldn't get a meeting with him if I wasn't on his donor list. That is when I made the commitment to run for office, because it's disgusting that you should have to write a check for $25 to get a meeting with your representatives. It's a broken system. It's a system you're a part of, by the way, and that you've been upholding. And it's why I'm running. We have corruption. We have money in politics. We have politicians, frankly, like you, Royce, who've become millionaires in office and have spent their time legislating in their own best interests instead of the interests of their constituents. I'm done with it. I'm tired of it. And so is Texas.
Now we get the MJ Hagar out. Do I have an opportunity to respond?
Unfortunately, we are not allowing rebuttals on these candidate questions. Those were the rules that we all agreed upon. A few more questions for you.
Do you want to go down this road, Royce?
MJ, you seem to be saying a little more, so Senator West, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is this, MJ, people want to know you hadn't been visible. You hadn't shown up at debates that you basically said that you were going to show up at, and you just hadn't been there. And so people have a right to know that if you have supported John Cornyn in the past in terms of giving him money, how will he use that against you if you are successful? People have a right to know also that you voted in the Republican primary. And during a time when people were when the Republicans were trying to do away with Obamacare, and also they were against women's rights to choose. Those are issues. In terms of you taking a shot at me, I'm from the projects of Dallas, okay? And if you're taking a shot at me because I've been a successful lawyer, basically providing job opportunities for people in my community, then take that shot. I have no problems with that.
MJ,
Ashley,
I'm gonna
I thought
give
we weren't going to get to rebut, but I need to defend myself.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the opportunity.
So, okay, great. I'll take that opportunity now. If you're going to demonize every Democrat who's voted in a Republican primary, which Democrats across the state have voted in Republican primaries because we're not used to having Democratic primaries because we haven't been fielding a wide enough field, then you're going to have a hard time building a coalition, Royce. And you know, it's not just about being a successful businessman. You have refused time and again to say that you will divest your financial portfolio from to put it into a blind trust.
That's
so that
not
you
true.
can't legislate in your own financial best interest.
That is not true.
Well, I would love to.
I have to say that that is not true. No one's ever asked me to do that.
Facts matter.
No one's ever asked me to do that. The fact is that being you voting in a Republican presidential campaign is an issue.
Senator West, Mrs. Hagar, we have to move on to closing statements. It's now time for those closing statements because we guaranteed both of you 2 minutes to share your final thoughts with our viewers. So we want to make sure we incorporate that. Now, we'll start in the opposite order from opening statements. So, Senator West, you will get to make your closing statement first.
Thank you very much.
Such a shame.
Members of the public, Democrats, the question is whether you need a true Democrat in office and whether you want someone at this moment in our history where we really need to have someone that has the experience to deal with the issues in Washington, bring fresh ideas. That's Royce West. For the next 10 years, we need to make certain that we elect someone that can make certain that over these next 10 years, the Democrats are able to bring in place different governance issues and deal with some of the issues that we always want us to deal with. Issues concerning voting rights, issues concerning racial issues, issues concerning ethics, issues concerning climate change, women's issues. Royce West is the person that has demonstrated the ability to be able to do that while working across political aisles. I've been able to get that done. When we begin to look at the issue concerning racism in this country, and I say to you, yes, Black Lives Matter, and all of us know that. From that vantage point, Royce West has taken a leadership role in not only writing and passing one of the first body cam laws in this country, and you know what that's meant in terms of transparency. I've worked in terms of racial profiling. I've worked in terms of making certain that teachers were able to get a pay raise. I've worked in terms of trying to reduce the costs of higher education in this state. I'll do the same thing in terms of Washington. Women's rights, ask Wendy Davis. Ask Cecile Richards about Royce West. I was the first person in the state Senate to file a bill concerning weapons. Assault weapons and banning those assault weapons. I also filed a bill to do universal background checks. Royce West has been in the mix getting things done. And so if you want someone that's inexperienced, I understand that. But the question is, does experience really matter? When you get ready to do your resume, what do? You make sure you put your experience on there. And so I'm putting my experience before you, and I'm hoping that Royce will be your choice. Please go to roycewest.com to find out additional information.
Thank you, Senator West.
About
that
this
is your time. Mrs. Hagar, your closing statements.
Experience does matter. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of career politicians condescending to me that my 12 years in uniform, bleeding for our Constitution on foreign soil, 5 years working in healthcare, or my experience as a mom of a 3- and 5-year-old are not important enough to consider. I've had an opportunity to share with you some of my vision tonight. Unfortunately, I think John Cornyn's the person who won tonight because we're allowing them to divide us instead of unify us, and we have to stand together if we're going to deliver the kind of reform that we need. We can't do this politics as usual back and forth, y'all. I have developed my vision for this state, through the tens of thousands of miles I've driven across this state while some people were, going to Dem Club meetings and campaign events. I was out on the road meeting with essential workers, with border communities and talking to them about how our broken immigration system is impacting them. I was out talking to unions and meat packers and people putting food in our grocery stores so that we can keep food on the table for our kids while they put their own lives at risk. But you know what? I'd be remiss if I didn't take this amazing opportunity to lift up some of the voices on the down ballot candidates on the coordinated campaign that I'm running, because I can't do this by myself. So please go out and do some research on the things you heard tonight, but also do some research on, great candidates like Kayla Alix and Ann Johnson in Houston, like Angela Brewer in Denton, Elizabeth Beck in Fort Worth, Kiki Williams in Killeen and Lampasas, and of course, my own state representative, James Tallarico in Williamson County. These down ballot candidates are worthy of your time, your volunteering, and your support. Now listen, today's the first day of early voting, and the election is July 14th. It's critical that we vote. Don't let them scare us and divide us and tell us that it's not going to be safe. Vote safely and vote in November.
Thank you all so much for
vote safely,
participating in
but
tonight's
please
debate and
vote
for our viewers
like
for
our
tuning in.
kids'
Head on
future
over to
depends on it.
KVUE.com
Thank you.
to catch what you missed.
Not happy that y'all let that turn into that, but okay.
So
we'll definitely
MJ,
be back for the next one.
I will say, if you guys can hear me, I think she took her earpiece out. That obviously was not the plan, but
I can hear you.
That obviously was not the plan, but when she continued to speak, everybody was continuing to speak. I mean, I just felt like it was stuff that our viewers still needed to hear. But Senator West, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us. We certainly appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
What you been doing?